Hey, so I got done watching the first two episodes of Pluribus, and uh, I had a bunch of thoughts I had to write down in a notepad while I was watching the first two episodes, and I wanted to get my thoughts out before I infected myself with the collective and listen to a bunch of other podcasts where they talk about it. So, uh, yeah, I just wanted to get this out into the world, and I'm going to talk about not really the actual show itself, but just lenses through which you can interpret it, which I found the most interesting part that I wanted to write down because there were so many thoughts that went through my head. It's a really awesome show that you can watch the actual events of the show, the characters, the plot, and stay within that world, or you can, in addition to that, you can think about what the show is saying about one topic or another topic, and I found that really interesting. So here we go. I made this little slideshow for my scribblings, but one of the things that I thought was interesting was the lens of art and how with art you kind of need a disconnect between two people's perspectives, and with that, the joining, right, with one collective consciousness, you don't get that. And that's sometimes been seen as like a problem that art solves for you. And at times in this show, I wonder if Vince Gilligan or the character of Carol, who's also a writer, if they as artists view that as something that's like good. So I think you need a different perspective. As very famously, Roger Ebert, I believe, said that, you know, movies are an empathy machine. And it's interesting that like maybe without the need for empathy, what's also the need for movies, everybody has those, can experience those emotions. There's not that communication barrier that you use art to surpass or whatever. And then also you have this idea that art happens in the mind of the viewer. You know, you can paint a painting and 100 different people can see them and they can all experience a different piece of art almost through their interpretation. But if it's all kind of jumbled into one, in, you know, made into a soup of one consciousness, then where's the art happening? You know, that's something else that I think is an interesting idea. Also, if you create this like world of paradise and no conflict, right? Then is there compelling art? And it's like, maybe that's a worthy sacrifice. Maybe it's okay to say we're not going to have awesome art, but we're going to have a world where everybody's happy. But I wonder if the character of Carol is okay with that. I wonder if there's some kind of beauty that she says at one point, what are we losing? And that's like one of the first things that came into my head. We're losing like the beauty of struggle, maybe. There's actually something else about that later. That I'll get to in this, you know, janky slideshow. And then my last thought was they talk about going to the Guggenheim, and I do wonder, are the collective, the we, the ones who are joined, do they actually appreciate the Guggenheim, or is that kind of an attraction for the English-speaking people who aren't part of the joining? Are those 6 people the ones that are meant to enjoy the Guggenheim, or does the collective even appreciate that anymore? It almost seems like pointless. There's a lot of like luxuries and stuff that the 6 people that we met in episode 2 are meant to appreciate and enjoy, but the collective don't seem to have any kind of enjoyment. More of like a singular desire to assimilate and please people. Here's one that came to me a lot in episode 1, but also in episode 2, is mental health. And I remember thinking, like, Carol obviously is not totally the most well-adjusted person. And her, like, locking herself in her house and being surrounded on all sides by people coming to get her, who are in the collective's mind, they're there to help her. And that just made me think of, like, someone, you know, that feeling where how would you know if you're if what's good for you, right? Because that's really how they are coming at this, is that they want to do what's best for her, and she has this totally disparate idea of what that would be and how that would look. So it's very interesting from a mental health perspective to think there's such a tricky line between autonomy and actually looking out for somebody, because I think you couldn't potentially, maybe not in the world of Pluribus, but in a similar situation, you might be able to make a compelling argument that it actually is okay for them to barge into her house and like force her to join and everything, and maybe it would be good for her. And then in episode 2, we saw where she lashes out first with just I think her name is Zoja or Zoha, and it like kills, we find out, 11 million people. And that's also feels like a mental health thing, could be interpreted that way, where you kind of break and you snap and lash out at people, and it's not really, I don't know, it's not like a conscious choice all the time, and it's hard to control that, and you can hurt people who are just trying to help you, which is kind of what the collective are doing here. This is a little Evangelion thing here. The instrumentality Hedgehog's Dilemma. Minor spoilers, I guess, for Evangelion, but there's this concept of instrumentality where everybody becomes one, and we'd like you to join us, kind of a thing, was also part of it. That's like one of the only times I've seen this kind of concept in media that is being expressed through Pluribus. And the Hedgehog's Dilemma is the whole, like, the closer you get to people, the more you hurt each other, like the more capacity you have to hurt somebody when you get close. And so you're scared to get close, but you also simultaneously need to get close in order for like warmth in the case of a hedgehog or whatever. And in the case of humans, you need to get close for your own like social mental health and all that. But then you are more prone to being hurt yourself. Anyway, something else I found interesting was with Ravi, we saw that there's basically no such thing as adolescence anymore. As soon as you are joined with people, you have the wisdom of the oldest human beings alive collectively, like all of them put together. You are the wisest, just as wise as everybody else, right? And without adolescence, we talked about before with art, there being no conflict means that there might not be art, but also without adolescence, there's no learning, there's no growth, because as soon as you are part of the collective, you know everything that there is to know, basically, and you don't make mistakes, you don't learn and grow as a person. And that's another thing that I think we are losing, that Carol Sturka was talking about. So that's something I thought was interesting. Also, there's this idea, I think Carol kind of becomes the enemy of people who are, I put neurotypicals, but like, it could be just anybody not affected, or, people who are doing better. And she's kind of like the downer. She's the, she's the wet blanket on everybody. And she's kind of, in her mind, she's pointing out reality, and she's gesturing toward things being wrong. And that can sort of build resentment, where even if people care about this person who is struggling mentally, they can still build up a resentment of like, do you always have to? It's hard. It's not like they hate this person, but it just becomes grating, I guess. And that's the struggle of dealing with somebody who has mental health issues, and being the person who that you are garnering resentment in other people, but there's not much you can do to control it all the time. And so, yeah, that's very interesting. I think Carol feels that, where she's lashing out. And we saw also when she made the family members also like C's or whatever, that she was kind of, justifiably getting their frustration directed back at her. And yeah, so that's interesting. And then I think she has this like kind of, the way it's depicted, you almost see her as like a doomsday prepper, which is interesting. She has this paranoia, which I think is totally justifiable, but it just kind of visually similar in language, I thought. So I put that on here. And then the last one is like loneliness. Carol is kind of unique among the 6 that we saw, because since Helen died, she doesn't have anybody that anchors her to the collective, the joined part of society. And I think that's a interesting thing, especially in current times, where if you have people that are completely disconnected and they have no interest in what happens to the rest of society, they don't really care. They feel so spurned and so forgotten about, and they're so lonely. They don't really care what happens, and that can lead to like less reservations about doing some harmful things. And so that's something else I thought could tie into mental health here. Next, we had artificial intelligence. The collective of like all of mankind being kind of smoothed over and polished into one homogeneous blob does feel very evocative of artificial intelligence. And all these, it's interesting how we saw these characters, well, more like bodies, that could all do all these crazy tasks. Like she said with Ravi being able to have no gynecology, or these people being able to pilot airplanes. It's like, it's just all the collective's knowledge. And that was interesting. It does feel very much like AI. And when she interacts with people, it kind of feels like she can't tell. She wants to interact with real people, which we saw with those 6 quote unquote real people. They are individuals. They have flaws. They're authentic, but they have flaws. They are original people. Whereas when she interacts with Zoja or someone else, it feels more like when you're on a social media app and you're interacting with a bot and you realize that this is not a real person. Like I have written down here, it's like dead internet theory. It's an empty feeling when you realize that there's no one on the other end of what you're talking to. And that's kind of how I think Carol might feel when she's talking. It almost feels like there's no one on the other end, but it's interesting because she does have that compassion for the people that she's affecting, even before she sees with the 6 that she was affecting their families. And there's also the interesting part where, yeah, if you talk to ChatGPT, it'll like praise you. It'll be like, oh, what an amazing question. And that's also something that the joined people have. Yeah. So then there's a lot of politics I thought you could interpret into this. First of all, when she says like, fuck every single one of you, and it kills people, which is very interesting. It's interesting that it has that effect on them. And I wonder if that's like the sum total of all the emotional pain that causes manifests in more physical pain than it would for a single individual. I'm not sure, but I thought it was interesting that just her words literally killed people. And is that a political thing? What does it say about the words? What does it say about the people that are being affected by those words? Just an interesting thought, I thought. And then I also was back to the mental health thing. There's this kind of idea that like, well, if you're outnumbered, if everybody agrees this is a good thing, who are you, the one person, to stop it from happening? Like, what authority should you have just because you say differently? And so that's kind of a scary part about democracy potentially being like the tyranny of the masses, right? Where it's like, well, if like you are completely outnumbered, there are more people that say this is a good thing. Sorry, you don't really, you gave your vote and it was outnumbered, so we're gonna do the thing that you disagree with. Kind of interesting. And because of the collective communicating so fast, that democracy happens really quickly. So basically anything they do has like the stamp of approval, the mandate of the masses, right? And then there's the efficiency of working together for one goal rather than being divided. If you have these political systems that are constantly at war with one another, you end up with government shutdowns potentially, or just stagnation in parliament or whatever you might expect. Whereas when everybody's working together, and this is kind of also a political system thing, maybe, I wouldn't know, but maybe a more cohesive system could be potentially more corrupt but also more efficient. Who knows? She does mention Stalin, but not in this context. And then there's the surveillance state. They talk about the drone flying over her head, and she's constantly putting the pillows on the windows, worried about being surveilled, which is a totally reasonable problem. There's also this interesting thing where the collective has this like innate drive. Now, at first, I wasn't sure that it was like a biological thing. It was interesting that they phrased it that way, because it does make the DNA or the RNA segment that was inserted into a virus or whatever. It does make it seem more like an alien thing rather than just being some kind of glue that connects already existing human things. Anyways, but there's this drive to like forcibly assimilate people into the society, which made me think of like Native American people who are like forced to become they're forced to not speak their own language and all that and speak English and become quote unquote like real Americans. And then there's also the dissolution of borders, with everybody being part of the same collective. Like, these borders are super fake, and maybe they already are, but like in a super zoomed out sense, they are fake. But I thought it was interesting that episode 2 opens up I'm not sure if it's in the Levant, but it had the truck that said the Levant on it. So I think that was an intentional choice, that they open up there, and we see like there was like turmoil there, but they're cleaning up from it. And yeah, I don't know. That just seemed like a very intentional choice to start there. And then, and what is that saying about these borders and like these weird lines that are drawn in the sand that divide people? And then I was also wondering, specifically when Carol sits in the back, she sits in the economy rather than in first class, which was interesting. And I was wondering what that might be saying. And I think it's a symbol of her rejection of this new world order, this new norm. And then I thought to the other 6 people there. You have the Mauritanian, one of them looked like she might have been from South America. I'm not sure. Woman from South Asia. But the point is, Carol's like a very affluent writer, and I wonder for these other people, they're pointing out things like, hey, there's kind of no more racism, there's no more war, we're all getting fed for nothing, so for them it's like they might view it as like a huge step up. This is an awesome development. But for Carol, she might just be privileged enough that she can say this is a step down. More politics. I thought there was an interesting thing with maybe some members of the 6 also might just come from more collectivist culture or collectivist government as well, where there's more emphasis culturally put on the good of the many rather than the good of oneself, one individual. And if it's good for everybody, it must be good, period. Maybe not period, but it's overall a good thing. Whereas in the West, there's a lot of individualism. So I thought that was interesting. Also, the way Carol is like fighting back against this idea, and everybody's like, what are you talking about? This rocks. Like, or especially Lakshmi and her talking about her kids, and she's kind of in denial, saying that like, oh, I still have my family, and this is good and everything. And Carol is saying like, that is not your son anymore. That is like 500,000 people put into one. Way more than that, really. It's like 7 billion. But yeah, so this is thought that Carol is there's this concept called like crazy making, where you just she's almost being gaslit, I guess, where she's being told that this is good, and she's like, no, what are you talking about? I know this isn't good. Stop trying to tell me this is good. Like, you can try to tell me that everything's fine, and I just know that it isn't. So it's very frustrating, and it's a feeling that I think a lot of people feel in politics a lot, actually. And that's actually, I realized that the second one is kind of the same thing, where this like quote unquote neoliberal capitalism, where sometimes the economic numbers will say things are good, but there's this feeling regardless that things are terrible and the economy is doing poorly and it's not taking care of people and the wrong people are in control and all this kind of stuff. And you're just being kind of told that, no, it's good. Stop, just ignore it. Like, I promise it's all good. Don't worry about it. And that's kind of the position that Carol's in right now. Also, it's interesting that there's this kind of separation, atomization, where Carol feels so disconnected from everybody. She feels even more alone now, even though there's more connectedness than there ever was before. And I think that's interesting. It says something like you could make a parallel to social media, where we are technically we are more connected than ever before, but simultaneously we feel more alone than ever. And I thought that about Carol. It's just interesting that with there seems to be like a post-scarcity world now. A lot of the problem with scarcity and overpopulation or whatever is actually just a problem of allocation of resources. So that might just not be a problem anymore. And so it's interesting that the good that comes out of this Pluribus virus or whatever, there doesn't seem to be need for money. People just do things for one another. They drop off a scooter or a plane and just let somebody else use it, and there's not really an exchange of money that I saw. I also thought the tone policing was almost a thing here, where Carol is like lashing out at people. She's screaming and she's using profanity and all this stuff, and they're like they're kind of ignoring her message and just being upset by how she's saying it. And that's really what does end up affecting a lot of the people, where they start having those like seizures. And then with the forced joining, they kind of like did those chemtrails, I assume, with the planes, and they just kind of forced everybody in, and 800,000 people died, I think, and they didn't really get a choice in the matter, but ultimately they view it as like a good thing, even though they said it was like a biological imperative. It doesn't seem like they perceived it as being a choice or something that had moral consideration. It's interesting how the six that were not joined, it feels almost similar to how they viewed food, where eating meat, eating other organisms was not really something that required moral consideration, whereas even though that it did cause suffering, and in the case of the collective, they viewed the assimilation of others, the forced joining into their system, as like not something worthy of moral consideration necessarily. Even though they sort of knew it was bad at some level, it was like not a choice for them because it was a biological directive almost. And then there's some like futurism stuff that I thought was in here, where they have like this telepathic communication with like, I forget what that's called, but like Neuralink maybe. And that was interesting, like instantaneous communication. Maybe this is how the future could end up being, where people just know things like, oh, I know that this like Dasani guy said that this water was fine. And it's interesting how she keeps like, you have these transportation devices just being dropped off for people, where that would be like kind of an Uber, or here, let me just get you an excavator from a helicopter. That feels very futuristic. And using the women who are almost robots, but they're kind of like AI robots, where they have their own thoughts, but not really human feeling, and using them for sexual pleasure also felt kind of futuristic. There's some civil rights stuff in here, where like Carol has the right to autonomy, and she has the right to her own choices, even if they're kind of incorrect, where she's allowed to give herself heat exhaustion even by the collective, even though they are like, every single doctor on the planet says this is a bad idea. Also, you have the right to privacy. We talked about that with the drone, but also it's interesting how she wanted the character to be a woman originally, but she kind of hides that from the world. But now everybody knows, and she didn't get her own chance to kind of come out to everybody. The world just the entire world now knows that she's queer in some way, and that's kind of an intrusion on her privacy. And as we talked about before, where they talked about there's like no racism now because everybody's one. That's kind of interesting. Also, there's a few things here that I thought the show might be kind of reflecting on human nature, or maybe human nature has been changed in some way, where I don't think veganism is human nature, but the collective are all vegan now, or vegetarian at least, and that's interesting. I wonder if the statement here is that with the collective knowledge of all 8 billion people, the sum of that knowledge is, or the, what is that? The parts are greater than the sum of its parts, right? The knowledge is greater than the sum of all individual people's knowledge. And together with all that, they, unilaterally said, yeah, this is bad. Now that we have the full picture of what we were doing, we know it's wrong. That might be what's being said, or it might just be something weird with the virus and how the virus views life forms. There's also like this desire to please, and I wonder if that's the same thing. Is the desire to please inherent in all 8 billion people, and that's why the collective behave with such a desire to please those 6? Or is that something else that's being imposed by this virus? Another thing, like this kind of conflict, the war and the strife and all this kind of battling amongst each other, is that not part of human nature? Or, yeah, it's just like, it feels like that is something that is in, like, definitely humans will always do, but is that solved by the virus? Or I don't know. That's just an interesting thought to me. And then sexuality too. The collective themselves don't seem to have this like libido. There's no sex drive that I know of. It feels very mechanical, and I wonder if they're going to give birth to new children just to have them join the collective and like continue on as a species or not. I wouldn't be able to tell you at this point in the show, but it feels like that's part of human nature that did get accepted away, or I don't know if that's the right word, but like pulled out. It got removed from humanity, and a lot of humanity does seem to have been lost or changed into something that is no longer humanity by this virus. So that's everything I've got, and hope you enjoyed my ramblings. I wanted to just get this out there. So great show. I might do this again. Bye bye.